Kentucky and Tennessee, then push into the heartland of the Confederacy and occupy Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia.
I hate this guy.
Meanwhile, the Navy would clear the Mississippi, surround the Confederacy by sea, and choke off supplies. The war would be fought along a 1,000-mile front. That fall, Lincoln elevated McClellan to General-in-Chief, replacing the aging Winfield Scott. "I can do it all," McClellan said, but he did nothing. December.
I'm sorry.
He had plans to lead it anywhere. As we approached the brow of the hill, my heart rose higher and higher. Felt to me it was in my throat. I would have given anything to look back in her loss, but I kept right on. The valley below was in full view. I halted. Much afraid, and I. This was a view of the question I had never taken before, but it was one I never forgot after. Ulysses S. Grant. In September, Ulysses S. Grant took Paducah, Kentucky, a strategic city at the mouth of the Tennessee. But 2 months later, his in Kentucky, when he insisted that at least 200,000 men would be needed to suppress the rebellion in the West. No one believed him. He grew melancholic, prone to fits.
No one believes that. No few individuals who said that trust the German president, who actually just being saying prediction about the
British steamer at gunpoint in international waters and arrested the Confederate diplomats found on board. Britain's Prime Minister Lord Palmerston was outraged and demanded their immediate release and dispatched 11,000 troops to Canada. "One more at a time," he said, and quietly let the Confederates go. The North would not abandon its efforts. December 31st, poor old 1861. It has been a gloom couple of years. I should be glad of this impossible were it not 1862. Like Victoria Pepper. A week before the Battle of Bull Run, Sullivan Ballou, a major in the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers, drove home to his wife in Smithfield, Washington. "You, Sarah, indications are very strong that we shall engage. Perhaps tomorrow, about your lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not fall. I know how American civilization now leans upon the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. Sarah, my love for you is timeless. It seems deeply grateful to God and you, but I've enjoyed them for so long. How hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes who lived and loved together, and see our boys grow up to honorable men. If I do not repent, my dear Sarah, you'll never forget how much I love you, nor that when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. If the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they love, I shall always be with you in the brightest day and the darkest night. Always."
You know, elbow. So, got a bad reaction to that game.
Always. It happens all the time. There's nothing that I
He thinks, especially when against you.
Sarah, do not want me dead. Think I am gone, and wait for me. Sullivan Ballou was killed a week later in the first battle of Bull Run.
They charge phone calls. Cheryl, make sure Mr. Soprano is scheduled for 2 o'clock. Just remember.
Because the neighbors have lethal.
Is building in Las Vegas a huge part of Las Vegas culture? Hiring all positions. 1,000 of beautiful girls and 3 ugly ones. Have you ever heard of this place? Is building in Las Vegas a huge part of Las Vegas culture? Hiring all positions. 1,000 of beautiful girls and 3 ugly ones. Have you ever heard of this place? Is building in Las Vegas a huge part of Las Vegas culture? Hiring all positions.
Back in the 1950s, the set was a drive-in movie theater. Now it's a park. Let's see what people lost. First line was a pity from 1926. Have you ever wondered how people watch TV in the olden days before there was cable TV? Well, they used to have an antenna on the television. And if you had a lot of money, you'd have an antenna on the top of your house. Or in this case, on the top of your building. If you look here, you'll see that instead of having a coaxial connection at points, it would go up to the roof, and everybody would share the same antenna. You don't see very many of these around any longer. It's kind of fun to find. Have you ever wondered how people watch TV?
Rage applying is the new quiet quitting. It's when you apply for a job that'll pay you more. What's wrong with that? You're just using the word rage to make it sound bad. Employees aren't clocking out to go to the bathroom in a new trend called seat shitting. People are allowed to apply to other jobs. Oh no, you're right. You're undying. What's the difference between agile and scrum? We often hear these terms used interchangeably, sometimes synonymously, and they're not the same. Think of agile as an umbrella. It's an umbrella of some 4 specific values, 12 specific principles, and underneath this umbrella are some specific frameworks. And Scrum is one of those frameworks, but it's not the only one. There are others like extreme programming and DSDM and Crystal and others. And each framework
Always wondered how these people make money because they're always walking around the Las Vegas Strip asking if you want a photo taken, but most people say no. But then we finally saw somebody say yes, so they say yes. They say, well, how much is it? They say it's free, you just have to tip. And before you get your money out with the photo, they say it's $30 typically for a tip per model. That's not $60. This woman was like shocked. She didn't even ask the price before. And she's like, can I give you guys a no? And then they went back further than the music. Can I delete the photo? And they said no. We've always wondered how these people make money because they're always walking around the Las Vegas Strip asking if you want a photo taken, but most people say no. But then we finally saw somebody say yes, so they say yes. They say, well, how much is it? They say it's free, you just have to tip. And before you get your money out with the photo, they say it's $30 typically for a tip per model. Now it's not $60. This woman was like shocked. She didn't even ask the price before. And she's like, can I give you guys 20 each? And they said no. No. We've always let the cowboy stuff on stream.
Wait, so you told your page you speak Spanish on marketing me? But then they street from my for you. You should have won the clerk knows the ultimate airport. Hey, what's up? Just on my way to the airport. Wanted to pick up some big shooters.
So let's say a raccoon steps on this. I mean, this is sharp. Does it make them clean?
So what happens with raccoons? They have hypersensitive hands.
Okay.
They see far but not up close. So they taste, they feel their hands, and when they come into
Fallen asleep with the song John Brown's Body, ringing in her head.
6 weeks ago because I went to a trade show in Orlando.
Now in the dark, she got up and scribbled out the words with a pencil stub.
So what they do, they bought it. They bought me
She
out.
sold
And
her
2 weeks
poem
after
to the
the trade
Atlantic
show,
Monthly for
You're
$4.
surrounding this rug you're standing on.
It became the anthem of the
How much
Union.
would that cost me to surround the edge?
I'm going to give a better explanation on how
As long as you give me the answer, we'll give it.
So what happens is raccoons like going to defecate on the front step. It mimics them walking into a shoreline. It's the trait like the front step.
And then what happens when the kids want to go down the stairs?
So what happens is the product can be moved. It's heavy and will blow away before it happens.
Set it up every night.
On my customer's a statement.
But it has to be put somewhere where somebody isn't going to step on it.
Right.
How do you get this on top of your car?
By 1862, Russia had emancipated the serfs. Public Les Miserables. Jean-Bernard Foucault measured the speed of light.
But don't they kind of crawl and walk
In
slow?
America, the United States had passed the first
never seen
national
a
income tax. It was changed.
I was studying the product
be offset by incompetence and low morale. The Eastern side that copies the South. Who would control the Mississippi?
But the thing about it is, I would be terrified
Along a 1,000-mile line from Manassas, Virginia, to Shanghai, Missouri, and beyond.
they're going to sue me. Right? That's the problem for me.
As 1862 began, over 1 million men were massacred for war.
So what happens with raccoons? They have 100%
In a fierce struggle for Tennessee, the people of Clarksville on the Cumberland found themselves prisoners in their own homes.
They'll have to touch it. It becomes so uncomfortable. They're not keeping walking past because
Far north of any fighting, the people of Deer Isle, Maine suffered too.
I'm selling for
The sad news from places most of them had never heard of.
So far this year, I made $80,000.
Yeah, had changed hands 72 times.
You don't ever meet someone famous and you tell your friends.
Sam Watkins, the Confederate private, would see his first big battle in Tennessee. Elisha Hunt Rose, from Providence, Rhode Island, to celebrate his 20th birthday in a Union camp. Union General George McClellan together for today. It is for a vast future also. Now, in this, its second year, the war was becoming a struggle over the...
It's one of those watershed things. The nation had come face to face with a dreadful tragedy. The way of family was a dreadful tragedy. It's almost inconceivable anything that horrendous could happen. Travel with casualties in the war battle was far beyond anything we can imagine. We had 10% casualties in the battle today, and knowledge of bloodbath. They had 30% one after another.
No, that's a straight pipe. I'm looking for an L pipe. L's are straight. Lowercase, maybe, but okay, fine. I'm looking for a capital L pipe. It bends at a right angle. Pipes don't bend. All pipes are straight. All pipes can't be straight. If they were, your department store wouldn't be selling those U-pipes right behind your short size holes. How do you think that pipe is?
We're talking about the consumer electronics show that just wrapped up last week. The home is a container specifically related to your home, your remodel, whatever.
And some. Did you get the recall notice about the belts? Back in 94? Yep, got it. So, think of some kind of L pipe? Yep, 2.25 inch. Septic? Yeah, it's my neighbor's. We rented a loader backhoe for the job. My mason's got a new design. That's what I rented. Well, I will keep
This afternoon, seeing the general alone in the office, I stepped up to him and said, he then asked me how long since I left home and if I was ever away for so long a time before. I told him I had been in the service 7 months and never been away from home alone before. Well, said the general.
Yes. Imagine you can test your blood sugar on your phone. The NES is a fucking joke. The biggest issue with this toaster fuck of a console was the 72-pin connector. Sometimes the pins would get a little loose, so the pins on the game wouldn't connect.
I always shot
so
at
instead of
private.
running right,
It
it
was
looked
they
like
that did the
this.
shooting and killing. If I could kill or wound a private, why my chances were so much better. I always looked on officers as harmless persons.
And you can just use the reset button. But when I do that,
The commander of Sam Watkins comes to Tennessee. From there, the Confederate chief, commander of the 2nd Division, General Leonidas Polk's 1st Army of the Mississippi. Above that, War Secretary George W. Randolph. Finally, to Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America. For one Union soldier, the chain of command descended from President Lincoln, Secretary of War Simon Cameron, General McClellan, commander of the Army of the Potomac, to General Erasmus, Colonel Frank Wheatley.
I'm thinking of starting a steamboat line to run on Pennsylvania Avenue between our office and the Capitol. Will the mud never dry so the Army can move?
Of all detestable places, Washington is the first. Crowds, heat, bad quarters, bad fare, bad smells, mosquitoes, and a plague of flies transcending everything within my experience. Beelzebub surely reigns here, and Willard's Hotel is his temple. George Templeton Strong.
Throughout Lincoln's presidency and his Truman presence, he was fairly on pigs and kids.
Abraham Lincoln's problems were not confined to fighting rebels alone. The president's unwieldy cabinet included former conservative Whigs, Free Soil Whigs, and Union Democrats. Four had been his rivals for the Republican presidential nomination. Nearly all were privately sure they could do a better job than their chief. Secretary of State William H. Seward hoped to replace Lincoln. Secretary of the Treasury Salmon P. Chase wanted to replace Seward. Mary Todd told her husband to get rid of both of them. Instead, Lincoln fired War Secretary Simon P. Cameron. The Pennsylvania boss, so corrupt, said Lincoln, the only thing he wouldn't steal was a red-hot stove. The new Secretary of War was Edwin M. Stanton, an able, ruthless war Democrat from Ohio, fast enough against the Confederates. The Army Secretary of War, Stanton said, has got to fight or run away. The champagne and oysters on the Potomac must be stopped.
Dear Ellen, I can't tell you how disgusted I am becoming with these wretched politicians. They are a most despicable set of men.
Officers for advice, and in exasperation, suggested that if General McClellan does not want to use the Army, I would like to borrow it for a time. Finally, he ordered McClellan to move on Manassas, convinced himself, now occupied Northern Virginia. Instead, he proposed to float his army to Fortress Monroe, at the tip of the finger of land between the James and York rivers. Then race up the peninsula to seize the Confederate capital. Impatient for any action, Lincoln agreed. McClellan,
February 9th, 1862. Dear Mr. President, General McClellan has almost ruined your administration and the country. He is a do-nothing. He is thinking of the...
What shall I do? The people are impatient. Chase has no money and tells me he can raise no more. The general of the army, McClellan, has typhoid fever. The bottom is out of the tub.
In the midst of all his troubles, the president delighted in his sons. The oldest, Robert, was away at Harvard, but Willie, 11, and 8-year-old Thomas, known as Tad, had the run of the White House. Willie was studious, liked to compose verse at meetings with his troops. In February, he developed what the doctor called bilious fever. His parents sat up night after night to nurse him by. For 3 months, Mary Lincoln veered between loud weeping and silent depression and sought to communicate with her dead child through spiritualists.
If I had not felt the spur of necessity urging me to cheer Mr. Lincoln, his grief was as great as my own. I could never have smiled again.
The war left Lincoln little time to mourn. He was soon back working 18 hours a day.
As she came plowing through the water, she looked like a huge, half-submerged rocket.
Confederate engineers were bolting iron plates to the hull of the steam frigate Merrimac, building a warship more powerful than anything the Union had. News of the monster quickly reached the North. Secretary of War Stanton feared she would steam up the Potomac and shell the White House. There was probably only one man in America who could stop the Merrimack, and he was mad at the Navy. The Swedish-born inventor John Ericsson was proud, vain, and cranky, and felt he'd been cheated out of payment for services to the government years before. But when Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles begged him to do something to stop the Merrimack, Ericsson came up with an extraordinary design. His ship would have only 2 guns, but the Merrimack's 10, but they would be mounted on a revolving turret. Though his vessel would be made entire, sea shall ride over her, and she shall live in it like a duck. Professional Navy men dismissed the plan, but Lincoln overruled them. And just 100 days later, on January 30, 1862, Ericsson's ship slid into Manhattan's East River. He called her the Monitor, and there had never been anything like her. The single vessel contained 47 patentable inventions.
We ran first to the New York side and then to Brooklyn, and so back and forth across the river like a drunken man on a sidewalk. We found she would not answer her rudder at all.
Once at sea, water spilled in, ventilators failed. The ship filled with gas. Her crew began to faint. But the Monitor kept limping south. 400 miles away, off the coast of Virginia, the Merrimack was waiting. It was wash day for the Union fleet in Hampton Roads, Virginia. Laundry was drying on the rigging of the Union warships when the Confederate Merrimack headed straight for the USS Cumberland. Opened fire, but the shots bounced harmlessly off the Merrimack's side. The Confederate ship rammed the Cumberland, then stood in so close their muzzles almost touched. The Cumberland sank in shallow water. The Merrimack went on to set the USS Congress afire, drove the USS Minnesota aground, then drew back for the night. For one day, the Confederate Navy ruled the sea. At 1 o'clock that morning, the crew of the battered Minnesota saw a strange-looking ship draw up alongside them in the darkness.
Close alongside the Minnesota, there was a craft such as the eyes of a seaman never looked upon before. An immense shingle floating on the water with a gigantic cheese box rising from its center. No sails, no wheels, no smokestack, no guns. What could it be?
The Monitor had arrived. Next morning, the epic battle of ironclads began. Hull to hull, the two ships hammered away at each other, so close they collided 5 times as the men inside, half blind with smoke, loaded and fired. After 4.5 hours, the Merrimack drew off. It was her only fight. 2 months later, rather than surrender their ship, the Confederates, while Europe watched in worried fascination. From the moment the 2 ships opened fire that Sunday morning, every other navy on Earth was obsolete.
General Grant habitually wears an expression as if he had determined to drive his head through a brick wall and was about to do it.
The year 1862 would introduce 2 great forces into the war, unspeakable slaughter and Ulysses S. Grant. While McClellan hesitated in Washington, Grant, back in the field after months of desk duty, won 2 crucial victories out west, launching an ultimatum to the Confederate commander: no terms except unconditional and immediate surrender. The Tennessee
News stories described him coolly. But before Grant's men marched into Fort Donelson, Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest slipped out of it with 1,000 men. "I did not come here for the purpose of surrendering my command," he said, and led his troops 75 miles through the snow to. After the Confederate defeat at Fort Donelson, the Female Academy and Stewart College in nearby Clarksville, Tennessee, were converted to hospitals.
Sunday the news came. Such panic-stricken people were never before seen. The wounded were being brought up. The citizens were running. There were already 2 hospitals here which were filled with the sick, and they, poor fellas, crawling up. And from every piece, walking, going on horseback, in wagons. Nanny Haskins
Informed the Union commander that the Confederate Army had retreated to Nashville, that there were nothing but Lincolnites through Clarksville began.
Early in the war, a Union squad closed in on a single ragged Confederate, and he obviously didn't own any slaves. He couldn't have much interest in the Constitution or anything else. I said, "What are you fighting for anyhow?" And he said, "I'm fighting because you're down here," which was a pretty satisfactory answer.
Artillery, ambulances, pontoon bridges. It took 400 boats 3 weeks to land it all at Fortress Monroe on the Virginia coast.
The whole region seems literally filled with soldiery. One of the finest armies ever marshaled here and commands in person.
And you know that your general loves you from the depths of his heart. It shall be my care to gain success with the least possible loss.
To defend their homes and hurl back the invaders. For the North, it was slow going. Roads said to be bone dry were bogs. Union officers forced to risk 11,000 Southern troops dug in, not even a tenth of McClellan's force. But the Confederate commander was John Bankhead Magruder, a showy Virginian who loved amateur theatricals. He now outdid even himself. To fool McClellan into believing that his small force was enormous, Magruder kept up a sporadic, widely scattered artillery barrage and paraded one battalion in and out of a clearing in an endless circle until it seemed to Union observers a mighty host.
Corporal Edmund Patterson has been traveling most of the day.
It seems clear that I shall have the whole force of the enemy on my hands, McClellan telegraphed Lincoln. Probably not less than 100,000 men, and possibly more. McClellan called for reinforcements. General Joseph E. Johnston, the overall Confederate commander, could not believe his luck. Nobody but McClellan, he said, could have hesitated to attack.
Once more, let now, nor with fuller purpose to sustain you, but you must act.
The president very coolly telegraphed me that he thought I had better
Us apart. If we don't get at each other sometime, when will the war end? My plan would be to quit ditching and go to fighting.
But McClellan chose to. As he settled in for a siege of Yorktown, Union General Phil Kearny took to calling his commander the Virginia Creeper.
During the Peninsula campaign, McClellan was working his way up the York-James Peninsula, and he came to a stream, and he and his staff were sitting there wondering how deep it was if they had to march across it. And Custer, who was a junior officer on his staff, just graduated from West Point, captain, I think, rode out into midstream, sat his horse, and turned around the saddle and said, "McClellan, this is how deep it is, General."
I have seen the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have built in an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his writing.
And the cap is shapeless as a feedback. A photograph of any one of them, covered with yellow dust or mosaics of mud, could ornament any mantle, north or south, as a true picture of our boy.
1 in 13 would die of disease. The average age of a soldier was 25. The minimum age for enlistment was 18. But recruiting, he enlisted. Shot in the left arm during battle.
Almost every known trade, profession, or calling has its representatives in our regiment. Tailors, carpenters, make-techs, printers, bookbinders, and publishers, gentlemen of leisure, politicians, merchants, legislators, judges, lawyers, doctors, preachers. Some malicious fellow might ask him, but we beg his pardon and refuse the license. All the appliances of home life which are possible: post office, letterbox, postmaster, and mail carrier. Our boys write vastly more letters than they receive.
You can harvest from family and home.
July 1862, Tupelo, Mississippi. Dear sisters,
Our one line at 833-317-4672 or
I would be the gladdest person in the world to see you and talk with you a while, for I see nobody here but men, and they appear to be very sorry.